Hello, hello. Welcome to Heart of the Tribe. My name is Shel Wagner. I'm so glad you came to join us today. I've got a very special guest today. I'm so excited to have him on this show. There's been really what's been on my heart is to try to understand how we navigate the bringing back of the 12 tribes together under the leadership of Yahushua HaMashiach. And I couldn't think of a better guest to have and come share his heart, because first of all, his heart is always for Yah and for what the scriptures have to say. And two, he's an amazing historian. I mean, I've never been able to study underneath someone who had more clarity on the day and times that we are living in, as well as what has happened to bring us to this point. I love the geopolitics that we end up discussing and so many other matters. So with that, I am going to go ahead and welcome my guest to the show, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon.
Hi, Shel.
Hey, Dr. Pidgeon, so good to have you on the show today.
Good to see you. Good to see you again.
How are things in the north?
In the frozen North Country? Yeah. Well, it's fantastic. I mean, we have a saying up here: Alaska doesn't grow on you; it makes you perfectly unacceptable to live anywhere else.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You gotta be able to put your boots on.
Yeah, it is so true. It is so true. Yeah. But it's really good to see you again and good to speak with you. And I know you've picked out a juicy topic for us today.
I really have picked out a very juicy topic for us today. And I just wanted to kind of bring it in this way just a little bit. My story, of course, y'all got a hold of me through a homeschool book as I was trying to lead a singing Christmas tree, right? This is how I'm leading a play in front of the singing Christmas tree, and my daughter has picked out for our homeschool curriculum the family guide to biblical holidays, and I'm doing contortions, going, God, this is my job. This is what I do. I do the Christmas celebrations and the Easter celebrations, and I'm trying to do that, and it's like I'm getting punched from the inside out. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Yeah, this was 2002 when this happened to me. So, of course, as I began to study, everything that I saw was like, I have swallowed the traditions of man that are full of lies and falsehoods, and it was shocking to me. And so, of course, when I tried to explain to my pastor, who had always been sweet as Southern iced tea to me, he calls me in after I get through the singing Christmas tree, right? He calls me into the office and says, we've got to plan the Easter egg hunt. And I innocently begin to explain to him why I don't think that's a good idea. And maybe we should do something else because of what I've learned, right? Well, that sweet as iced tea pastor rose up with a whole different persona that I had never gotten to see before. And basically, I mean, he said to me, "What do you think? I'm stupid? I know that these aren't the times. We learn all this in seminary, but this is the best time for evangelism in this church. And if you want to keep your job and your ordination, young lady, you'll and lead the Easter egg hunt." Oh, yeah. Whoosh, full claws out, right?
Wow.
What an experience. So, of course, that was my last day as a pastor in the Christian church.
Yeah.
Because I quit, that day, and I walked out and went, okay, now what, y'all? So what quickly happened was, as I started studying, everything was Jewish in intent, and my heart went, oh, okay, this is it. It's following all the traditions of Judaism. Every Messianic congregation, that's what I went to. It was, you've got to follow the Jews. So what my observation now, and this is really getting to the crux of the matter and what I want to talk about today, and I've got lots of talking points, but I know you're going to have plenty, is my observations at this point. The church has been indoctrinated to believe that they must bless the nation state of Israel or they're not going to be blessed, right? We've got a huge Christian Zionism, right? Then
Mhm.
we've got the greater Messianic community has signed a deal, and I know you know the specifics on this. I don't, but there's been a deal signed, right? That they're going to uphold the nation state of Israel and abide by the Noahide laws, right? So I know that none of this is right. I know none of this is right. And I know our eyes are to be on Yahushua coming to rule and reign over all 12 tribes, his people. And we can expect an unexpected bumpy ride as he brings his justice on the nations in order for this to happen.
Yeah,
That was
very
what
good,
was on my
very
heart.
good term. Yeah, very well said, Michelle. Very well said. Yeah, and when you talk about that, I mean, I kind of went through the same path, but when part of my path was that I wanted to explore the tenets of Judaism to make sure that I knew what was going on, because in my heart, I really wanted to reach the Jewish people. I wanted to reach people of that faith to, if you will, take off the blinders, right?
Yeah.
And in order to do that, I needed to understand the faith. And so there were two paths really that I went on. One path was to understand Islam. And so I read the Quran and I read the subsequent literature that is associated with the Quran and got to know the machinations of the Islamic community. And then I read a lot of Jewish material, and I got criticized for reading a lot of Jewish material, but I read the most obscure works and the more difficult works. And of course, when you start studying things like Chabad Lubavitch, which is a place where Stephen Ben Nun was for a while, they're readily teaching the esoterics of Kabbalah on their own website, right? And so I wanted to explore that literature, and I did explore that literature and read it and found a lot of it to be pathologically insane. I mean, some of the stuff was so far gone. I mean, it was just ridiculous. But anyway, but I wanted to know because I wanted to know what was their thinking, how they thought, and what were the different paths of Judaism, because there's many different paths, right? Kabbalah is one side, or you have another side which is Orthodox. You have another side which is Reform. You have different levels of Orthodox. You have Hasids. You have Chabad Lubavitch, and these are all different levels inside. And then there's a Levitical order as well, a set of people that construe themselves as Levites inside of Judaism. And all of these things I was curious to know. And then I began to explore the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Gemara, and ultimately to compare the Yerushalmi Talmud and its earlier writings, the first Mishnah and the first Gemara, with what would evolve into the Babylonian Talmud and its Mishnah and its Gemara. And so now the Mishnah is a set of books. I mean, I think it's 26 volumes, right? And a lot of the Mishnah, it cannot be, you can criticize the Mishnah if you want, but there's, I think, 2 volumes that are agricultural protocols, how you farm, right?
Right.
And it's very instructive in that respect. And the Gemara, the rabbinical opinion, gives you an idea of the different kinds of thinking. Remember that the ideology inside of Judaism was to allow rabbis to compete with one another to see who had the best argument. And so as a result, you have the midrash practice, right?
Right.
And, and you can see how that midrash practice works out among smaller minds, particularly in the opening of the movie, The Frisco Kid, right, with Gene Wilder. And, the rabbis are having a debate about who they're going to send to America because they had a request for a rabbi. And here's the whole all these rabbis sitting around this table, and they're all screaming at each other as loud as they possibly can and pounding their fist with as much emphasis as they can possibly make to make a point that no one else is listening to. Right. And, and eventually the chief rabbi says, well, we're going to take a vote. And everybody's screaming and yelling. Well, the votes had it. And we're sending Gene Wilder to San Francisco. Right. And so, the whole idea of it is that, you have, in order to really understand Judaism, you really have to get to know it. It's not fair to criticize Judaism if you really don't know it. Right. And so in going down that path, I felt misled in many, many ways. And then eventually I came to see the full tenets of the religion that is Judaism. And, I had some friends that decided to make Aliyah through Nefesh B'Nefesh, which is an organization that is different than the Jewish Agency, which also allows people to make Aliyah into Israel. But Nefesh B'Nefesh would require a denunciation of Mashiach before they would allow you to come into the country. And this was part of their policy. And so some people that I know did that and were allowed into the country. And as a consequence, their lives crashed and burned.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah. And so this is this is a reality. Now, when you're talking about this Noahide system, this is something that also took place. So a lot of the Messianic congregations with which I was affiliated in the Pacific Northwest, there was a big leader in that field who was Mark Biltz. And Mark Biltz led El Shaddai Ministries. And El Shaddai was a very interesting place. And I knew many people that were attending that congregation, El Shaddai. Many people. I knew about maybe 60% of that flock, actually. And Mark was really anathema to me. He hated the Cepher with a purple passion, although there were at least 60 copies in his congregation that were opened up every Saturday, right? And of course, he had difficulty with his messianic dancers, with his worship team, and some of the other things. But I'm not criticizing any of that. But I met some people through Mark, including Jesse. I don't remember his last name now, but he was a Jewish fellow who was actually engaged in mission work in Sderot. Now, Sderot is a little village that is 1 mile away from the Gaza Strip. Wow. And was routinely the target of Gazan rockets, for 15 years. And so we visited Sderot and walked through its streets and hung out in its, you had, if the alert came up, you had 15 seconds to seek a shelter. And so the bus stops were bomb shelters, the playgrounds were bomb shelters. We went to the police station and saw the old Qassam rockets, and we visited places that had been hit by rockets and the damage and so forth. So we saw it firsthand. And Yishai was doing ministry there. He was delivering diapers to women that had no money and food and this kind of care too. And then when the first Gazan war broke out, they came alongside the IDF outside of, because they had respite stations where the IDF could go, including bars. And Yishai would go in there with a team and they would minister to those troops. Well, so he was called a Tzaddik in Israel, but he ultimately died. No one labeled him as a missionary because he never came out and claimed Mashiach. Right. But he visited my house every year because I used to give him substantial financial gifts. And he visited my house every year. And he used to ask me the same question. First question would come through the door into my house. He'd say, "So is Barack Obama still the Antichrist?" That was the very first thing he would say to me when he walked in the door, right? And, and I dearly loved this guy. He was a great guy. And I met him through Mark Biltz. But, Mark was being influenced by Yitzhak Shapira. And Yitzhak Shapira and Mark decided to embark on a course to rein in the Messianic community under the Noahide laws. Now, there were two organizations that were part and parcel to the Messianic community, and they're international organizations, and they have very strict standards. So if you want to join one of these standards to become a rabbi in one of these congregations, which I believe Mark is, a rabbi under one of these standards, there's two things you can't do. You cannot preach a two-house theory, that there was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. That's banned. And you cannot teach of the doctrines of Batya Wooten. And Batya, right? You know her and her work, right?
I was friends with her. She was one of the first women that I met when I came into all of this. She was having a big conference. I had gotten the download about the 12 tribes, and I had had all my banners, and she invited me to come if I would help work at her conference, to come and bring all my banners and my teaching on the tribes. And I had written these little tags all about the tribes that went on these banners that I made, right? So she stops by my table. She says, "Sweetheart, how's your sales going?" I said, "But yeah, everybody just wants to buy my tag." She said, "That's because you're supposed to really write a book on this."
Yeah, that's very good. That's very good of Matthew to say that. Yeah. But she was banned by these two messianic communities. Now I don't remember these, the IMJA or the IMDJ or something. I forget these
Right.
congregations' names, but there were two congregations in the Seattle area. Mark was one of them that came under one of the banners, and there was Beit Tikva, which was another pleasant place. It's a pleasant place, but nonetheless, even though it's a pleasant place, it came under one of these international messianic fellowships, and they were very clear that you had to have somebody who was Jewish to be your rabbi, and they either had to be Jewish in their lineage, or they had to be Jewish in their faith to be the rabbi. And that if you were not Jewish, you were welcome in the congregation, but you had to come under the Noahide laws. Now, the Noahide laws, of course, we did a lot of research on this, and the Noahide laws all spring from Maimonides, right? They do not exist in Scripture. They're a rabbinical paraphrase that was created by Maimonides in the 14th century, and they're part of the Gemara. They're part of the Mishnah. They're part of the Gemara, rather. They're rabbinical opinion, and they have been incorporated into the Talmud. And so what this is, and the biggest problem with the Noahide laws is that they're Mashiach denying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And of course, anybody who really gets to know the Jewish world, for instance, I used to have a Jewish prayer book. Well, I still do. I've got a couple of Siddurs, and I have other Jewish prayer books. But there's some very common prayers. Like, for instance, we used to pray the Kaddish. Is that what it's called? The Kaddish? It's the prayer for the dead, which is really quite a beautiful prayer. It's a beautiful prayer. And we used to pray that prayer in Hebrew. And, of course, we used to pray the Amidah.
Amidah.
But the Amidah has a big problem, which is the 18th paragraph of the Amidah is a curse on people who believe in Mashiach. Okay? So if I ever prayed the Amidah, I'd have to leave out that last paragraph. And there were other prayers too that, that's called the standing prayer in Judaism. And it's the kind of prayer that is given in at the Kotel, right? At the Wailing Wall, at the Kotel. Now, I mean, I have to tell you, I have been to the Kotel 3 times, and I have prayed at the Kotel 3 times. And the third time I prayed there, I asked myself the question, what am I doing praying at this pile of rocks? I don't believe these are Temple Mount stones.
Right.
I don't believe that this has got anything to do with the Temple Mount. This is the fortress Antonia, and it was built by Herod, and that's obvious. You can see it in the geography and the geology of the place. And but nonetheless, I said, well, and Yah kind of convinced me at that time. He says, there's a lot of prayers that happen at this place. And I said, yeah, that's true. And he said, because there's a lot of prayers that happen at this place, it is a place of prayer. I said, okay. And so I prayed, and that particular prayer was really quite revealing for me. It was a 20-minute prayer that went on there at the wall. And but because I had prayed at the Kotel does not make me Jewish. And it's like there's a lot of people who see, like, for instance, you cannot approach the Kotel unless you're wearing a kippah. Okay, you cannot. The rabbis will beat you up. So when you see people, they try to say, well, this person's a Jew or that person's a Jew because they prayed at the Kotel with a kippah on. You can't pray at the Kotel unless you have a kippah on. You can't approach the wall, Right. And that's something to keep in mind, right? So at any rate, and I had discussions in Jerusalem. I mean, it was hilarious because I'd be walking down the street, and like we were in the old city of Jerusalem, and I walked into this shop. It was a linen shop. The guy had looms there that he was making linen goods, And I walked into the shop and I said, hey, does anybody here speak English? Well, there were 2 Orthodox guys, Hasids. They were all in the black get-ups, with the yedlocks and all this, And, oh, yeah, we speak English. Well, the next thing you know, we've had a 4.5-hour conversation going back and forth with these guys, blah, 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 blah. But it was very congenial. It was a very, long conversation. Finally, the store owner comes in. He finishes his 5th cigarette. And he comes in and he says, hey, can I have my shop back, please? Oh, I'm sorry. We took too much of your shop. I really apologize, right? And from there, we went to the tomb of David, which, of course, is not really the tomb of David. And but they claim that they have artifacts that substantiate its existence. Anyway, we went into the tomb of David, and there were 2 rabbis there. One was an Ashkenazi rabbi, was a Sephardi rabbi, and they were speaking to me in Hebrew. Well, at the time, I didn't know any Hebrew at all. This was 2011. I didn't know any Hebrew. And so anyway, this guy speaks to me in Hebrew, and I'm understanding every word he's saying to me. And he says, well, do you want to pray? I said, yeah, sure, I'll pray. And so he says, okay. And so he comes to me to pray. When he comes to me to pray, he says, okay, repeat after me. And remember, he's speaking only Hebrew, right? Because he didn't speak a word of English. He says, okay, repeat after me. And he says, Shema Israel. And I said, Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu Yahweh Echad. That's what I said back to him.
Right.
And when I said that, I opened my eyes, and the Sephardi guy was just like, he was just like this. He was just like in shock, right? And anyway, but this happened in the Tomb of David. And, so, I mean, the thing is that in having knowledge of the tenets of Judaism, now I understand Judaism very clearly as to what it is and how it is. And I understand the blemishes in the Talmud. Now, there's a lot of blemishes in the Talmud that are really horrific, quite horrific. In fact, it is maybe the most wicked book on earth, most wicked book ever printed because of the stuff that's in it.
Yeah.
And most of the rabbis distinguish themselves from it, particularly the idea that a Levite priest can marry a 3-year-old, that the Talmud teaches that it's proper to have sex with a child under the age of 9. It's just like poking them in the eye. They won't remember it anyway. This is taught in the Talmud. In addition, the idea of separating the goyim from the chosen people, and how the goyim are, you can kill a goyim and you can never be held accountable for it. The goyim are to have their children aborted. The goyim only have one soul, but the Jew has 2 souls. I mean, all of these teachings that are within the Talmud, and many of these teachings, by the way, are quite contradictory to the Torah. They're very contradictory to the Torah. Mm-hmm. And so as a consequence, I got one more story to tell you before we go on, which is that, so I was in Canada with a very good friend of mine, who still is a very good friend of mine, both he and his wife. They're very good friends of mine. And we were up at Banff National Park. I don't know if you've ever been to Banff, but it's one of the most beautiful places in North America. Absolutely. Wow. It's breathtakingly beautiful up there. And so we were up at Banff, and I wanted to get a muskrat hat because I wanted a hat that would take me down to 30 below. Right. And so Ray and I are having this discussion. Well, the Mounties, they wear this muskrat hat that's good to 30 below. I said, well, let's go see if we can find one. So we embarked on this long mission trip, going through all the shops in Banff, trying to find a muskrat hat. Well, finally, we find this fur store. And so before we walked in, Ray asked me the critical question. He says, well, is it kosher to wear fur? That's a question, right?
Yeah.
Is it kosher to wear fur, right? So this was the question, and we wanted this question answered. So we walk into this fur shop, and there's a woman standing immediately to the left, and she is the owner of the store. And so she starts talking. And she goes on, and the next thing I hear her say, well, I'm a rabbi and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you're a rabbi? So Ray and I both looked at her and said, okay. So is wearing fur kosher? Well, of course it is, because all the blood has gone out of it. Therefore, it's kosher and you can wear it. She goes on and on and on. Well, the next thing you know, her and I have a 2.5-hour discussion right in the dead center of that store.
Oh, wow.
And she eventually anoints me in the store. And she was the daughter of the rabbi that had anointed the Canadian Constitution, the chief rabbi in Canada, right? Wow. And so she anoints me in the store. And I said, well, look, I'm going to show you a video that I just recorded at Lake Louise. And it was a video on John 1:1. And she says, oh, so you're a follower of Rabbi Yeshua, right? And I said, yeah, that's correct. She said, okay. So anyway, her name was Ruach, but she goes by Roki. And she's still there in Banff. She has 2 stores, one in Banff and one in, I think she might have 3, one in Toronto, one in Vancouver. But anyway, so just to give you an example of what we're talking about. So when we go back and talk about who is Yahudah and the kind of stories that the Christian church has been told, the Christian church has been lied to big time. And the Christian church, and I really, I really, on one hand, my heart breaks for the Christian church because of the kinds of things that have happened in the church. And in particular, since 1954, with the introduction of the 501c3,
Mm-hmm.
which was essentially, it was no longer the circumcision, it was the gelding, right? This was the castration, right?
Yeah.
And and the church was castrated in 1954 by Lyndon Baines Johnson. He was the author of that particular provision in the Tax Act. And
Wow.
and so as a consequence of that in combination with the scriptures that the churches use. Now, this is something that is very, very relevant to the modern church, because most people do not know that almost all the Bibles in North America that are used inside the Christian church are derivative of the Westcott and Hort
Mm-hmm.
modification. And the Westcott and Hort modification took place in the 19th century. They were two atheists from Cambridge University, and they had this German guy who was a hobbyist, not an archaeologist, had found a text in this monastery in the Sinai, and he found it in the garbage can. The monks were pulling pages off of it and using it to start fires.
Wow.
And he took the text back to Germany, and he claimed that he had found the oldest codex of the New Testament in the world, the Codex Sinaiticus. And this guy's name was Tischburn. And then he came forward with all these big, this big, really marketing campaign. I found the oldest text in the world, the Codex Sinaiticus. Well, once he got public with this, Westcott and Hort embraced it. Oh, he's found the text. And they took the text and they began to integrate that text with the Codex Vaticanus, Old Testament. And then they began to do other things that were really quite polluted, like they created a forged copy of the minutes of Laodicea, claiming that at Laodicea in 385 AD, they had determined there were 66 books in the Bible. Now, the Council of Laodicea is not a recognized council, a Constantinian council in the church. It was never recognized as an official council. Of the 19 copies of those minutes, only the ones in the hands of Westcott and Hort at the very last clause said there's 66 books. None of the other existing minutes said that. Okay. And so they married the already corrupted Codex Vaticanus that had been deleted by the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church takes the position, church first, scripture second. And we reserve ourselves the right to modify scripture to meet our catechism. And so the Codex Vaticanus was already corrupted. And it had problems with Eusebius's translation anyway, but then it was corrupted. They married that to the Codex Sinaiticus. Well, right after they did that, it became very public what Tischburn was saying. And then a fellow named Constantine Simonides began to publish in the Manchester Herald. I wrote it, or the Manchester Guardian. I'm sorry, not the Herald, Manchester Guardian. And I wrote it for the Tsar. I did a poor job of it. That's why it was in the trash can. I wrote it. That's why I threw it in the trash can, because it was a poor job. That's where he found it. And he published this for 3 years. Okay, so Westcott and Hort write a letter to Tischburn, and I think they were raking him over the coals. Well, when I was doing my research at the British Library in London, I found this letter. And so I went to the librarian and I said, I need to see that letter right there, that document. And he said, you see that code on there? He says, yeah, I see that. He says, you can't get that with a court order.
Wow.
That's how protected that letter was. You can't get that with a court order. So there we go. Thank you. So with that being said, you can see that now from this marriage of the Codex Vaticanus and the Codex Sinaiticus comes the New International Version, the English Standard Version, the American Standard Bible, the New American Standard Bible, the NKJV, and even the NLT, the New Living Translation. These are all derivative. Now, they have since found that the Codex Sinaiticus has 2,000 omissions or redactions in the New Testament alone. And then you have Westcott and Hort saying, well, that line never existed in the original Codex, because they're relying on the Codex Sinaiticus, which didn't have it, right?
Yeah.
Because Simonides had omitted it. So you have a text that is really corrupted at its foundation, created by two atheists out of Cambridge, that was given to the American church. And from these texts, now you have the Dallas Theological Seminary, which preached dispensationalism,
Mhm.
and you had other organizations which came in and began to teach lawlessness as a result of the way of the writings of Paul were structured. So when I saw this and came to realize this, and then I see what's going on in the Christian church. Well, it's very common for the largest Christian churches, the ones that are really the most pious, you might call it, or the most righteous, if you will.
Mhm.
They're really, at best, they're the Church of Laodicea, right? They're
Right.
lukewarm. They think they're all wealthy because they've got big screens and they've got big PAs and they've got a great big building, and they fill up their church with thousands of people. Therefore, they're holy.
Right.
Money does not make a person holy.
No. Did you see Dr. Pidgeon at Super Bowl Sunday? The woman kicked the Bible across the stage for the Super Bowl Sunday celebration
I
in
did
one of
not
those
see that.
large churches. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You just Google that one. It's all over YouTube. That was one of the mega churches, family friendly Sunday presentation. So on a Sunday morning, they had one of the, some of the pastors, associate pastors, whatever, put on a little display to excite the crowd about staying at the church to watch the football game with the whole group, because it was going to be a family friendly atmosphere. There's no drinking here, and we can do this as a church family. And in order to promote it, a woman, it was handed off the Bible. It was set down in front of her as if it was on a tee, and she kicked it across the stage.
Mm, 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 mm,
Yeah.
mm. Yeah. Well, again, when we come back to this now, I'm going to talk about this tonight. Actually, I'm doing a presentation called Sodom, the Untold Story.
Wow.
And one of the things that we can see, and this is something that's kind of, if I can finally see the forest for the trees here, is that what a lot of people don't know is that the Bible tells you that there are two sexes, male and female. He created them.
Yeah.
That they should be joined together as one flesh, and what Yah has put together, let no man put asunder. That is reiterated in the New Testament, where Mashiach says, haven't you read? Male and female, he created them, right? So you
Right.
have two witnesses, both in the Old and the New Testament. Now, but the Talmud says there's 6 sexes. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. It just gets worse and worse.
Yeah, the Talmud says there's 6 sexes, right?
Wow.
Which includes male and female. But there's 6 sexes. Now, because of this, it is the only document on earth that proclaims 6 sexes. It's the only document on earth that does this. Okay. Now, so when you see this expression is given expression in the modern world in the 6-colored rainbow flag.
Yeah, let me mention something before you go on with that. I in the description, just so everybody knows, Dr. Pidgeon does almost a daily show, very regularly, called Radio Free Alaska on his Telegram channel. And I have a link to his Telegram channel in this description. And he does a fantastic job of keeping up on, he really delves into a lot of these subjects. And I mean, they're great episodes, Dr. Pidgeon. I absolutely
Thank you.
love your Radio Free Alaska. I try never to miss that one. I may not always catch everything, but that one I'm on top of. I'm like, yep, I gotta listen in to Radio Free Alaska today.
That's really good to hear, Shell. That's really good. I mean, I love doing Radio Free Alaska, because we have and the Telegram allows me to speak without being kicked off, without being censored. And so we talk about some difficult subjects, and I try to behave myself on there, but nonetheless, there's topics we have to talk about, and we have to be candid, because if we're not candid, then we're not telling the truth. Right?
Exactly. And we're so censored,
Oh, yeah. And of course, there's so much, the mainstream media in the United States is now all propaganda. It's all completely controlled by the intelligence agencies. Some of the people are actually on staff with intelligence agencies. They're paid on the payroll,
Right.
and that are sitting in New York broadcasting news. And so, at any rate, so trying to get the truth out is very, very difficult. And
Mhm.
of course, I'm not saying I'm the only, I'm the sole progenitor of the truth. There are many other voices out there, but I try to speak as best I can about what we see in the world, right? And so it came to me, and I began to see it very clearly. When you understand there's 6 sexes in the Talmud, and there's a 6-colored rainbow flag. That rainbow flag is when you put a flag up. You remember the guys putting the American flag up in Iwo Jima,
Mm.
that big statue. Okay,
Yeah.
that was a very big deal because that expressed the victory of the sovereignty of the United States over that island, right? So
Right.
a flag expresses sovereignty. Now, this is what we see. This really comes out of the book of Numbers, right? Because
Right.
Moshe is telling them, you guys need to put up banners for each of your tribes, and you
Mhm.
need to have rods for each of your tribes that have your names scrawled on them. And then there's going to be 4 banners that are going to be in the 4 camps, right? The
Mhm.
east camp, the south, the north, and the west. And those banners are going to be what? The lion, the man, the eagle, and the ox, right? Which conveniently are the 4 faces we find on the seraphim that John sees in heaven and that Isaiah sees in heaven, right? Same 4 faces, right? So the banner, and even Moshe was told to put a seraph on a banner. Put a seraph on a banner that people could look and see and be healed. And he put instead a nakash, a serpent, on a pole, instead of putting a seraph on a banner, right?
Right.
And so anyway, the banner is very, very important in terms of showing sovereignty. Okay, here we go. Okay, yeah, there you go.
This is from one of your books. I believe it was the meaning was taken from the Basura from Cepher Publishing.
Yeah,
So, and then I put that what I did is I married tribal associations with that from Gwen Shaw's End Time Handmaidens, her book on the tribes. And so this is how we could see it. I've always, the reason I did that is it clicked to me that these particular books were written. We've got the same 4 stories told 4 different ways, right? But why? Because we've got these different 4
beautiful.
standards,
Yeah,
right?
beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, and this is how essentially how I laid it out in the book Besserot. This still continues to be an opening page in there, talking about these are called the Hebrew analytics.
Mhm.
This Pardes, the Hebrews analytics, and Peshat, Remez, Darash, Sod. And so we have Peshat, the plain or simple or direct meaning. Now, when you look at the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, this is a very short text. It's the shortest of all the Gospels. And it gives if you will, it's the whitecaps of the waves that are the ministry of Mashiach that Mark is putting together. Mark has some absolutely brilliant things in it. For instance, one of the things I like to confront Christian pastors on. Well, I'm a New Testament pastor. Oh, are you? So you're an expert on the New Testament. You don't know anything about the Old Testament. I can't talk to you about what's in Isaiah or what's in Leviticus or any of that. But you're an expert on the New Testament, on Mark. Okay, well, Mark 8 has something really kind of strange to say, which is that Mashiach comes to the guys and he says, look, don't you recall we took 5 loaves and we fed 5,000 and you gathered 12 baskets? Don't you recall we took 7 loaves, we fed 4,000 and you gathered 7 baskets? What part of that don't you understand? And so I challenge these pastors, tell me, why did he say 5 loaves? Why were there 5,000 people? And why did they gather 12 baskets? Why didn't he just say we took some bread, fed 5,000, and they gathered many baskets full of food? Why didn't they say that? Why is it specific to those numbers? It's a question they need to answer, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't avoid the fact that one of them is the Pentateuch, right? And the other is the 12 tribes, right? That there's
Yeah.
enough to feed the 12 tribes, right?
Yeah.
And in the
And there's
second instance,
2 fish, right? There's 2. Again, we go back to this 2 house doctrine, right?
yep, there it is. Yep.
There it is.
Yeah, yeah. It can't be avoided, Shell. And then when you look at the seven loaves taken, this is the sevenfold doctrine of his whole creation. And this
Yeah.
explains the 7 feasts. I mean, there it is, the
I
7.
call it the gifts of the bridegroom. right? The 7 gifts of the bridegroom. It was really interesting. I've done a series of shows recently with Tammy Sorensen, who is an amazing musician who deals in healing frequencies of music in order to heal the body through sound therapy, right? And so I start doing a show with her. She brings up numbers, and I think it's 33. I've got to remember. It's the Naso portion. So I remember she's bringing up where all the tribes come and they bring the gifts for the temple. And this is where she's found all these frequencies, right? And put it all together. And I'm like, this is Naso. This is being lifted up. This is, of course, it's coming up higher. This is frequency. And I'm like, it just blew me away.
Yeah, well, and all of that stuff is accompanied through there, and music is a huge part. Music is a pure language. It's spoken all over the world by everyone.
Right.
And it is a pure language, and it is the language of Yah. And to really get into music and to really understand music is really, it's something that a person should do. I mean, a lot of people don't understand this as a believer, but as a believer, you are called to understand music. You're also called to understand the Mazarot, because revelation is nothing but signs in heaven.
Yeah.
And you're called to know those signs in heaven. I mean, even even Revelation 1 is about a sign in heaven, right? And so there you go. Here we go. Constellation of the tribe of Judah. His feet are over the head of Hydra, the great serpent, about to descend upon it and crush it. And the 3 constellations, and the Hydra, the old serpent, destroyed. Crater, the cup of divine wrath poured upon him. Corvus, the bird of prey. Yeah. And so these things, and again, a proper study of these constellations to know the 88 constellations, to know those constellations that are on the event horizon and how those event horizons are predictive, and to really be able, when, I was looking at a megalith in Ireland that and if you ever get a chance to go to Ireland, there are some things that are absolutely required that you do when you're there, which is that there's a set of megaliths that are incredible to see. And they're the best, some of the best in Europe, which is Newgrange, which is a UNESCO site. And then there's 2 mounds that are associated with Newgrange called Knowth and Douth. Newgrange, Knowth, and Douth, those are absolutely, you have to see those megaliths. And then, of course, the tomb of what they call the Tomb of Jeremiah, which is another megalithic structure. The Tomb of Jeremiah is one of the most persuasive megaliths I've ever seen, because it still has the hieroglyphs or the glyphs carved into the entrance wall. Now, you can't get in there now, but you can stick your cell phone in there and take pictures of the glyphs on the wall. They're still there. And those glyphs have been deciphered now. And because they set forth constellations in the sky together with the solar eclipse. And as a consequence, they've been able to date that glyph to 581 BC. Right.
Wow. That is amazing.
So, yeah, it is. It's amazing. And now from that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I haven't been to Ireland yet, but my husband has. And by the way, he wanted me to make sure that I said that he wishes you well, and he's glad we're having this discussion today.
Yeah, well, give it my blessings. Thank you, Shel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so when we talk about these things, though, these are all incumbent for the believer to know. You're called to renew your mind. You're called to renew your mind and to give the justification for your faith. This is Peter's teaching, and this is Paul's teaching. And you should not be sitting around vacant. Even Mashiach says, "Judge ye with righteousness," right? And so all of these things are to be done. So, but going back to the Pardes, when we look at the Pardes in terms of the Gospels and this reiteration of the tribes, now we can see here that the book of Mark, talking about Ephraim, Manasseh, Benjamin, right? Book of Luke, Reuben, Shimon, and Gad. And then, of course, the book of Matthew, Yahudah, Yishakar, Zebulun. Okay, so when we look at Yahudah, now let's talk about Yahudah for a little bit.
Yeah.
Because when you see in Yahudah, this is such, I mean, I have to tell you, Shel, this subject is so fascinating.
It is.
And the reason it's fascinating, it goes back to, now there's a couple of things that I have read that absolutely blew me away. Okay. It absolutely blew me away. And Okay, so I'm going to see if I can spit this out. This is going to be kind of a difficult tale to tell, but let's tell it.
All right.
So in Genesis, I believe it's Genesis 38, you have the story of Tamar.
Ooh, I got a
Now,
slide on.
yeah, there you go. Now, Tamar was a very interesting girl. And she, Judah, okay, so, first of all, Judah did not exist at the time of Abraham, right? He's Abraham's great grandson. So
Exactly.
Abraham was not Jewish, and Isaac was not Jewish, and Yaakov or Yashar'el or Israel was not Jewish. None of the three of them were Jewish. Okay, so one of his sons, I believe it's the fourth-born son is Judah. Third-born son, third or fourth. Fourth son is Judah. Yahudah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
His name means praise.
Yeah. But his name also means, if you look at the Terushah, the doorway to Yahweh.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a dalet in there, right?
Yeah.
There's a dalet. And so the doorway to Yahudah. Okay, so here's Port Tamar. Now, first of all, Yahudah himself was a turkey. He was a putz. He was a schmuck. He was a schlemiel. Okay? Let me give you an example. He's the one that wanted to kill Joseph. Reuben talked him out of it. Don't kill him. Just throw him in the pit. Right? And then when they throw him in the pit, Judah says, well, let's make some money on him. We can sell them into slavery. Right? This is all Judah's doing.
Right here, the first recorded words of Yahudah.
What prophet? Yeah.
That's right.
And so now Yahudah, when it talks about him getting married, when you see Yitzhak get married, you see this beautiful courtship with Elazar presenting him in front of the parents of Rivka, and all of this stuff, and a dowry is given, and his credentials are shown, and on and on and on. And then Rivka consents. I mean, it's a beautiful image of how a courtship is to happen. When Yaakov goes to get married, well, he can't do that because he's running away from his brother who's going to kill him. Right. So he has all the blessing. He's got 100% of the blessing of his father Yitzhak, but he can't claim it because Esau said, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
So he has to flee. And so when he flees, he's got no dowry, he's got no presentation, and he goes to the same family. Laban was there when Rivka got married. He goes to the same family. Laban's like, you're kind of in trouble. You want to get married to 7 years, right?
Right.
And so you got this downgrade in the marriage. Now, when it comes to Yahudah, the scripture says he took himself a Canaanite woman.
Yeah.
He just took her, right? Okay, this is now, right? This is now my wife, whatever. She's pregnant, so I guess she's my wife, right? So, and he has 3 Canaanite sons.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes and brings in this girl, Tamar. Okay, well, now guess what I found out about Tamar? And I found this out through a very crazy source. The source goes to the legend of Romulus and Remus, the formers of the city of Rome, the founders of the city of Rome, who I believe were Zerach and Perez. They were Romulus and Remus.
Wow.
Okay, now that is a mind boggler. But the story goes that when you equate the people in the legend of Romulus and Remus to the people in Scripture, you find out the rest of the story. Because Tamar, get this, was a daughter of Esau.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, how's that for a mind boggler? Tamar was a daughter of Esau. Okay, now this is that's not in Scripture. Okay, that's outside of Scripture, but the record infers this in the legend of Romulus and Remus. Now, if that's the case, look at the people that are in the bloodline of Mashiach. You have Tamar, a daughter of Esau. You have Rahab, the prostitute, right? You have Ruth, the Moabite. Right. You have Bathsheba, the adulteress, right? Those are all the women that are set forth in the lineage, right?
Right.
So it's a very crazy lineage, but nonetheless, Tamar giving birth, and then Judah, right? I'm heading to Las Vegas to shear sheep. They don't call it Las Vegas, but that's where he's going. I'm headed to Las Vegas to shear sheep, right? And so Tamar shows up as a harlot on the way, and he says, and what does Judah say? What are you doing out here prostituting yourself? What's a prostitute doing here? I have nothing to do with prostitutes. You should clean yourself up and go home, clean up your act, and be a decent woman. That's not what he says to her. He says, how much, baby? That's
Right.
what he said to her, right?
You know what I found out about that, about her in this situation, is that Tamar took, I've just got it on the bottom of this chart. She took, even though she was told to wait for him by Yahudah, Tamar takes matters into her own hand, dresses as a bride, sits in the gate as a harlot, because it was the Canaanite custom for brides to fornicate for 7 days before their marriage. Isn't that wild?
That's going to put your marriage in the right spot, right? Yeah. And if that's the custom, who's the father of the child, right? Yeah, Yeah. So anyway, but when you look at this, so here Tamar comes up and she's presenting herself as a harlot, and Judah's response to her is, hey, baby, how much? And she says, well, how about the cloak, the staff, and the ring?
Right.
And so then she runs off with that. And then when he finds out she's pregnant, and look, how pregnant do you think she was when she was pregnant with twins? Right? How long was it before she was showing? 3 months, right? By the time she's 5 months, she's the size of a 9-month pregnancy.
Right.
So here she is, she's pregnant with twins, and everybody comes and says, hey, Judah, did you know your daughter-in-law is pregnant with twins? Burn her. That's what he says. Let her burn. And she comes in and says, well, wait a minute, before you do that, staff, cloak, ring, this is the father. Right? Now, the birth of the twins, right? Zerach's hand comes out first, red ribbon put around his wrist. The hand pulls back in. Then Peretz is born. They named him Peretz, means to break forth. He breached the birth order. He pushed Zerach out of the way to be born first. And then Zerach comes out. Now, the scripture describes the two of them as twins, not like Esau and Jacob, two nations,
right?
But twins. Okay. So with these twins, Zerach is technically under the Torah the firstborn, but he's marked with a red ribbon. Where else do we see a red ribbon used? In the selection of the Azazel goat, right?
Right.
And so you see one goat has no marking at all, is going to be the goat for the sacrifice. The other goat has a red ribbon on him and is pushed out in the wilderness. Now we're going to see that Zerach is pushed out into the wilderness in scripture. He's pushed out. His genealogy is pushed out. His history is pushed out. It's not covered in scripture. And instead, we're going to get the coverage of Peretz to some degree. But there's 5 generations missing in the scripture narrative. Or you don't start picking up on the sons of Peretz again until you get to Boaz. So there's 5 generations of what's going on here, where this happened, where'd they go, what took place, right? But it's very clear in Genesis that Yahudah doesn't touch Tamar anymore.
Right.
Right? He puts her away. Now, the legend in Romulus and Remus says, yeah, he put her away with the Vestal Virgins. He put her away in a nunnery, in a convent with the Vestal Virgins. And he took a boat, a little ark, and put the twins in the river and sent them upriver. Now, this is what the Romulus and Remus story tells you. And the next thing you know, they're rescued by, quote unquote, a wolf. And which is also very interesting, because you might recall that when Yashar'el is told about his son Joseph being killed, right? And they present him with the coat of many colors covered with blood. He says, go out and get the animal that killed him. And they present a wolf to him. And he's going to kill the wolf. And then he decides, I'm not going to kill the wolf. It's not proper to do it. And then the wolf speaks to him. And she says, I too am looking for my lost son. This is really quite a reflection on this idea that this wolf legend being tied to potentially Zerach and Perez, who may have both been the founders of the city of Rome. So when we try to follow what happened to Zerach, now, when you follow that, when you understand that the children of Zerach, who was, Haman, it was Zimri, and then, of course, Ethan and Calcol and Dardus. Well, Dardus would form the city of Troy. Calcol would form the city of Athens. Ethan would form the city of Cadiz and possibly Carthage. Haman would populate Romania, right? Only Zimri remained behind with the tribes of Israel in Egypt. All the rest of them went out to found cities. Why wouldn't they? That's what their father did in founding Rome,
Right.
right? So you kind of see this heritage, right? So with this being said, Zerach, now, when we talk about the tribe of Judah, the prophecy that's given in Genesis 49 that says, Judah, that there shall be a scepter in the hand of Judah and a lawgiver between his feet until Shiloh come. You have to look at the Torah provision of the right of the progenitor, the firstborn, or the primogenitor, I'm sorry, the firstborn. And the right of the primogenitor is in the hands of Zerach, not in the hands of Peretz. Peretz was a breacher. He breached. Peretz was the breacher. Now, so when we see the lineage of Mashiach in Matthew 1, it begins with Yahudah and then Peretz, right? That's where it goes. Then you come all the way down to Joseph Arimathea, the father of Miriam,
right,
in Matthew 1, and then Miriam, right? And then Mashiach. So Mashiach is of the line of the goat that did not have the red ribbon around his neck.
Wow.
This is why John the Baptist said, "Behold the Lamb of Elohim who takes away the sins of the world," because he knew his lineage to Peretz. He was selected not from the house of Zerach. Why did Mashiach come from Peretz and not from Zerach? Because he would be the Lamb of Elohim, not the lamb that was cast into the wilderness for Azazel.
Right.
And so the lamb cast into the wilderness nonetheless has the scepter in his hand and the lawgiver between his feet as his birthright. So the question becomes, where are the children of Zerach? Where are the children of Zerach? And now we know, we have a pretty good idea where the children of Zerach are. For one, I've talked with guys in Bulgaria, and they're very much linked into the heritage of Haman in Bulgaria. And they've established this linkage quite extensively. Darda was very interesting because he was known in the literature in that area as Dardanus or Darda. But Darda when he formed the city of Troy, he was governing the tribe of Lud. And the tribe of Lud are known as the Lydian people. They were the sons of Shem. The sons of Shem. Well, after the Athenian War, the Trojan War between Athens and Troy, right? Two brothers fighting each other. The whole of the house of Lud packed it up and moved to Britain. And they formed New Troy on the Thames River on a hill that they named after the tribe of Lud. It was called Lud Hill. Lud Hill. And it was known as Ludonium, which would later become London, and it was built on Lud Hill. Now, Lud Hill in London is the hill where St. Paul's Cathedral is. This is the place where Paul reportedly preached in London, and they built a cathedral there called St. Paul's Cathedral, and it sits on Lud Hill, the original town site of London. That's where London was originally formed, and it was formed as New Troy. So the House of Darda would end up on the western shores of the English Isles. That's where they would go, the Luds under the House of Darda. The House of Calcol would continue to reign in Athens until one of the grandsons, whose name was Gyalathus, packed it up and said, "Hey, let's go back to Egypt." And he took over 1 million people with him. And they went back into Mitzrayim. They went back into the Nile River Valley, which was by the way, the source of all their intelligence, all their writings, that all came out of Egypt. They get down there and they say, "Look, there's nothing going on here. This place is dead broke. Let's get out of here." And so they kept migrating, and they migrated across the northern steppes of Africa, and eventually migrated into what was known as Celtiberia, or Iberia, the Iberian, which was named after Eber, the progenitor of Abraham.
Wow.
Okay, so it was called Iberia because they were the tribe of Hebrews that were living in Iberia. Well, the western shores of this peninsula were known as Lusitania, and they were essentially unpopulated. It's pretty unpopulated even right now, but it was essentially unpopulated. And so Gyalathus took the whole of the tribe into this area, and they formed a city there called the Port of Galathes, now known as Portugal.
Right.
This tribe of Galathes would then become known as Gauls, or Gaelic people. And they would populate all of Portugal, and they would populate the northern part of Spain, now known as Basques. They would populate the western coast of France, then known as Gaul or Galatia, also sometimes known as Galil. And then they would cross over into Britain, and they would populate Cornwall, they would populate Wales, they would populate the Isle of Ireland, and ultimately into Scotland. Now, the first king now this all happened around 1100 BC.
Right.
But the first Gaelic king would not happen until 581. And this would be Yahudah the Herman, because Ireland was ruled by Danites, the tribe of Dan.
Right.
As was Scotland, as was Denmark, as was Norway. They were ruled by the tribe of Dan. And in Ireland, they were known as the Tuatha De Danann, the tribe of Dan, the Tuatha De Danann. And the Tuatha De Danann were actually Baali worshippers. They worshiped the cult of the serpent. Well, all of this would change when Jerusalem was destroyed in 586 BC. One of those left behind in Jerusalem, two of those left behind, was Jeremiah and Baruch, Yirmiyahu and Baruch. And the daughters of Zedekiah, the three daughters of Zedekiah, were left behind. Zedekiah fled the city and left his wife and daughters behind.
Wow. Now, is this the prophet or is this the king?
The prophet. Zedekiah the king. The king. Zedekiah the king, the last king of Jerusalem.
The last king. Okay.
Yeah, the Babylonians would capture him and his 7 sons on the way to Jericho. And they captured him, slaughtered all 7 of his sons before him, and then poked his eyes out and took him back to Babylon.
Right.
And the daughters, however, fled with Jeremiah and Baruch to Egypt.
Wow.
Now, the story goes, and you get kind of mixed stories on this, but the story goes that Jeremiah took the Ark of the Covenant, Jacob's pillow, and David's harp with him. These were the 3 artifacts he took with him into Egypt. And Baruch was with him. Now, when they got to Egypt, 2 of the daughters elected to stay in Egypt. But the one daughter, Tia Tephi, well, depends. Some people say 2 daughters came with him. Some people say 1. But they left, and the glyph that's on the tomb of Jeremiah in Ireland shows them leaving Egypt and traveling to Gibraltar, changing ships, and coming up into Ireland, where they ported in Ireland, and they came in to present themselves. And Tia Tephi, which means the tender twig, whose real name was, guess what? Tamar. She would marry Yahudah the Herman, who was the first Gaelic king to rule over Ireland, and she brought with her the Torah. And so, because she's got Jeremiah with her and Baruch with her, and they brought with them the Torah and Torah observance. She was in the direct line of kings from David, right?
Right.
And so the house of Peretz would marry into the house of Zerach for the first time with the wedding of Tia Tephi and Yahudah the Herman, 581 BC, and they would create the new Jerusalem in Ireland called Tara.
Wow. Wow. So is that like Tara or
T-A-R-A, Tara.
Tara. Okay.
That's what they named their capital. And that's another artifact you can visit while you're in Ireland. You can go to Tara Hill and see the place where it was built. And all of a sudden things changed. The serpent worship went completely out of Ireland entirely as soon as Jeremiah put the Ark of the Covenant down on the ground. The serpent worship left all of Ireland. And they became representatives of the Torah. So here you see the house of Judah now in the hands of Zerach, in the high kings of Ireland, which would become the high kings of Scotland. And it would be their children who would become the high kings of Wales. Now, the high kings of Wales were something else, because the tribe that would then move into Wales and Cornwall was actually the house of Joseph, not the house of Ephraim and not the house of Manasseh, right? Those are 2 distinct tribes that, if you recall, in Genesis 48, Yashar'el adopts them as his children.
Right.
These are mine. They become two distinct tribes. They get land grants in the Holy Land and everything else. The house of Joseph did not. Joseph, according to the book of Jasher, had more sons in Egypt with Asenath, and they did not get a land grant, but they sojourned with Moshe in the Exodus. And they ended up being part of the northern kingdom. But as part of the northern kingdom, they never came into the Ivrit language. They held on to the ancient Egyptian language, this tribe of Yosef.
So wait a minute. Now, Joseph and Asenath, are you saying they were still alive at the time of Moshe?
No, they had died, but
Right.
they had children. They had other children besides Ephraim.
Okay, their other children. Okay.
Yeah, and their other children left with the Exodus.
Okay.
But they were part of the Northern Kingdom breakaway. And so because of this, the Northern Kingdom has an interesting history. Most people don't know it, but in the Northern Kingdom, they were essentially anarchists. I mean, they were a very productive class of people. They were practicing capitalism. They were the builders. They were the ones that kept getting hit with the high taxes. They were the ones who built Solomon's temple. On and on and on. They were doing all the shipping, all the trading, all the work. That was Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, Dan, Ephraim. They were doing all of this, right? And so when they break away from the Southern Kingdom, there's nothing going on. They put up a temple with two bulls. It's like, that should cut it. Well, it wasn't cutting it. And so finally, when you get, I think it's 4 kings down the road, you come to this king Omri. Mm-hmm. And Omri, it's called a dynasty, the dynasty of Omri. He establishes, for the first time, codified law in the Northern Kingdom. He codifies the law. And when he codifies the law, the house of Yosef in particular became adherents of the laws of Omri. So when they were taken captive by the Assyrians in 722 BC, they were called like Omri, which in Hebrew is Qumri. So the Welsh to this day call themselves Qumri, and they call their language Qumraik. And Ross Broadstock and Alan Wilson demonstrated that the Welsh language is how you translate Egyptian hieroglyphs.
Wow.
They proved it.
And he's got a book on that on your site, right?
Yeah. And it spells it out. And Alan Wilson also developed in Moses and the hieroglyphs. He completely deciphered the black obelisk using a Welsh application to the Egyptian hieroglyphs, which you could do. You can, if you look at the hieroglyph that is the cartouche of Alexander the Great, or the cartouche of Cleopatra, well, then you've got a pretty good idea what's there. And they were able to prove it. And then he was able to completely decipher the black obelisk. And it was amazing what was being, the story of Joseph is on the black obelisk. The story of Moshe is on the black obelisk. It's all there, right? Which you've got no other record anywhere else in the hieroglyphs. But Alan Wilson demonstrated the story of Yosef and the story of Moshe do exist in the Egyptian hieroglyphic record, and they exist on the black obelisk. Right? Incredible stuff. So anyway, so you see now that this Welsh faction, this House of Qumri, is occupying Cornwall and Wales. And from them would come a king from the High Irish kings. And that king would eventually marry, one of their kings would eventually marry the other daughter of Joseph, Arimathea. Because Miriam had a sister whose name was Anna. And she married the high king. And that high king had a son whose name was Caractacus, who was known as Caratic, who was taken exile by Nero into Rome, him and his whole family. And that whole family is the family that is identified by Paul in the book of Romans. Greet this person, greet that person, greet this person. That's all the family of Caratic in Rome, the children of this king of Wales, who had married the daughter Anna, and whose great-grandson was none other than Luke, the writer of the Gospel of Luke, who would become anointed by Paul to be the first bishop of Rome. He was also in the direct line of David through this group of kings that were running what we now call Wales. So this whole thing now, so when we talk about the true tribe of Judah, the true tribe of Judah and the scepter in the hand and the lawgiver between his feet is really the Gaelic people.
Wow.
And by the way, part of those descendants of the Gaelic people include the French Huguenots that were persecuted in La Rochelle. It include the Basque people that are being persecuted in northern Spain. You know, if you go to Ireland, you'll find nothing but a history of persecution, nothing
Right.
but. And it still is going. The persecution is still going on in Ireland. It hasn't stopped. It's still going on. People think they can just run all over the Irish, and they do. They just trample them, right? And even in Portugal, you see Gaelic people. You see the Gauls, right? The so-called Gauls. And so this is really the true Yahudah that holds the birthright of the
Right.
scepter in his hand and the lawgiver between his feet.
So let me ask you a question about that, because a lot of it, where do we fit in this royal family of England that's been ruling in place? Where does that fit in? Because, you know, we've got all these different, let me just get the slide up here. Second. Like this one. Okay.
There you go.
How does this fit into all this?
Okay, so what you see here, Shell, this is a very good slide you put up here. Oh, yeah, and we can see some things here. Okay, so number one, you see down here in the right-hand corner is what's called a golden rampant lion.
Yeah.
And if you look up in the left-hand corner, you see that's a white rampant lion on a red background. But you go to the coat of arms underneath the royal standard of the United Kingdom, you can see a red rampant lion on a yellow background. Okay, so the red rampant lion is indicative of the house of Zerach. It symbolizes the red thread around the wrist.
All right.
The red rampant lion, and you'll see that, and you also see the secondary, the red hand up there in the circle. That's also indicative of the red thread wrapped around the wrist, and is a symbol of the house of Zerach.
Isn't that a Kabbalah symbol now too?
Well, I mean, look, the Kabbalah co-ops a lot of stuff, you know, and I mean, yeah, I think they do some kind of a red thread that is, I don't know if it's Kabbalah or if it's Chabad Lubavitch, or I'm not sure what it is, what it symbolizes. I don't know, but I do know there is a red thread linkage thing that goes on with that idea, with that ideology. But the red thread itself is actually, and so you can kind of see the red thread around the red hand, right? That's indicative of Zerach. And in these banners, they're very, very traditional in showing the golden rampant lion and the red rampant lion. Okay. The black rampant lion and the blue rampant lion and the white rampant lion, these are different indications of a different lineage of Judah. But the main thing to keep in mind is that you can follow the heraldry and the arrival of either the house of Peretz or the house of Zerach, predicated upon, if it's a gold rampant lion, that's the house of Peretz. If it's a red rampant lion, that's the house of Zerach. Okay. And so you'll see, for instance, in Spain and Portugal, that it's very common to see the red rampant lion there. And it's also very common to see it in Irish and Scottish heraldry, the red rampant lion. But you'll see the gold rampant lion, believe it or not, in Finland. On its ancient flags was the gold rampant lion. So, and when we talk about Peretz now, when you look at the line of Peretz, you know, Peretz was really not supposed to be the king and the lawgiver. You know, David was inordinate, right? But David was not inordinate in Yah's plan, because Yah wanted this established, that the Mashiach would come through that line, because this is going to be the Lamb of Atonement, the Lamb of propitiation, if you will, for the whole of the world. This had to come through Peretz and not through Zerach.
Right.
Okay, so that had to happen. But when you look at it, the kingdom only lasted, the unified kingdom lasted 2 generations, right? David and Solomon. And then, boom, it's gone. And then into 2 kingdoms. And then both of those kingdoms are completely gone in 14 generations. Right. Totally totaled. Now, so when we talk about Yahudah, we have to keep in mind that for people to say, okay, I'm of the tribe of Yahudah, well, it's going to be very difficult to prove that lineage. And so we've got 3 ways you can claim you are of the house of Yahudah. One is by genealogy, DNA. Another is by your citizenship of the kingdom of Yahud, also known as Judea, although the Latin term was Eudea, but the Hebrew term is Yahud. And so a citizen of Yahud was known as a Yahu, right?
Right.
If you're a citizen of Yahud, you were known as a Yahu. And if you go and you look at all the prophets that were alive during the time of that kingdom, Yishai Yahu, Yirmi Yahu, Obed Yahu, Zephon Yahu, Zakar Yahu. There's 167 people identified in scripture with the last name Yahu as members of the kingdom of Yahud. When you look at the litany in Matthew 1, however, as soon as you get to Yekon, he's taken off into Babylonian captivity with the rod of Aaron in his hand, by the way. He's taken off into Babylonian captivity, and then everybody else after that does not have Yahu on the end of their name. Then it merely goes to Shealtiel, Zerubbabel, and so on and so forth. Nobody's got Yahu anymore.
Right.
Because the kingdom was dead. And that kingdom, by the way, did not come back to life. It did, even though you may have had some Latin rewriters claiming Eudea, when they started writing the history of that region, it was not Eudea. When you look at the recreation of the kingdom that took place in 165 BC, roughly, under the Maccabees, first of all, were what we now call Armenians, right? They were of the tribe of Makkah, which was the 12th born son of Nahor, the brother of Abraham, who had been taken from that area under the Assyrian Empire and put in Samaria when the northern tribes were taken into captivity. They did what Stalin did. He took all these people here, moved them out, and then took their people and moved them in. One of that group was the house of Makkah. And this would be Yahudah Maccabeus, also Shimon Maccabeus, but their son, the son of Shimon Maccabeus, didn't call himself a Maccabee at all. His name was John Hyrcanus. And the Hyrcanus came from Hyrcania, which was the ancient name of the land of Armenia.
Right.
And he converted the Edomites to Judaism at the point of a sword, which was a recreated doctrine in the hands of the Maccabees. It was recreated.
Is this what we're looking at right here? That this area of Khazaria?
Almost, not quite. You see where the sickle moon is down there? The sickle and the star? Okay, that is near the area of Armenia. That would be the area of Hyrcania.
Okay.
And so, but we can come back to this slide here, but we'll get to this. But when you look at what happened here, so the true kingdom where the Maccabees would create the Hasmonean Empire, not Judea, they would create the Hasmonean Empire. That area was actually Idumea, not Eudea.
Right.
Idumea, not Eudea. Now, why do we say this? Because we have a teaching in Genesis that says when Yaakov came back with his wives and his kids and all the sheep and all that, and they're going to meet Esau, not Esau, Esau. That's the real pronunciation.
Okay.
They're going to meet Esau. So when they meet Esau, they're very fearful because Esau shows up with 400 swordsmen. Okay, what do you got to say, Yaakov? Yeah, we're here. We got my guys. You can just imagine them, right? It's like a scene out of the Magnificent Seven, right? Here comes 400 horsemen, armor, swords on, helmets on. What do you got going here? Well, I got some flocks and some wives and some kids. Right? A little bit of disparity. But fortunately, Esau is overwhelmed with emotion in seeing his brother, because why would he care if Yaakov had the blessing or not? He stole everything from Yitzhak. He took it all, right? Yaakov didn't get anything.
Do you think the strategy of the gifts, of sending them in waves of gifts, because he was coming with 400 men. So did that soften his heart? Was that Yah's strategy so that they wouldn't all be wiped out?
No, that was Yaakov's strategy. And the thing that kept him from being wiped out is that Yah softened his heart when he saw Yaakov. This is his brother. Who else you have in life but your family, right? And he saw his brother, and so he was greatly moved at seeing him. And then he says, follow me back to Mount Seir. And Yaakov says, well, I can't keep up with your guys. I mean, you guys are all on horseback, and I'm trying to move sheep and cattle and everything else. We're going to be a lot slower, so we'll catch up.
Right.
And so Esau takes off and goes back to Mount Seir, and Yaakov goes south to where? Sukkot. Well, Sukkot is the very first place that the house of Israel goes when it's in the Exodus. It goes to Sukkot. So it's immediately next to the river of Mitzrayim. So Idumea went all the way from Mount Seir almost to Sukkot. So where is that? Where is Mount Seir? Well, you can tell where it is because Mount Seir currently is in a country named after Mount Seir, Syria. Mount Seir, Syria.
In Syria. Okay.
Okay. It's not in Petra in southern Jordan. That is an absolute fraud. If you look at Google Earth, it's very simple. You just go and ask and say, well, okay, where's the biggest mountain in the Levant? And it's Mount Hermon. It's Mount Hermon. And Seir was named after a demon. It was named after a demon. What demon? It was Pan. It was the Baphomet. It was, that's who was hanging out at Mount Seir. This was the portal where the fallen watchers had come to earth, was in this at Mount Hermon, right? Mount Seir. Yeah. That's Mount Seir. So Mount Seir, and the proof of it is, where's Mount Seir? Well, right now it's located in Syria.
Wow.
Right? Wow. So now, the great myth that's not being told you is that this was not Judea. This was Idumea. Now, even Revelation tells you that Mashiach was not crucified in Jerusalem. He was crucified in Sodom and Egypt. That's what it says in Revelation. It says he was crucified in Sodom and Egypt.
Where is that, Dr. Pidgeon?
Revelation, I don't know. I'm going to have to look it up for you.
I'll look it up while you're talking. I'll see if I can find it.
Revelation 4? Revelation. I don't know. I'll have to look it up, but you can find it. And so at any rate, so when you see this now, okay, so the Hasmonean kingdom is reformed in an area that was Idumea, not Judea. And when it's overthrown by who? Herod the Edomite. And Herod's kingdom, which includes virtually all of modern day Israel, was an Edomite kingdom controlled by Edomites. And the temple that was erected there was called what? Herod's temple. The historians all know it as Herod's temple. That's distinct from the temple that the Maccabees said was the temple that they had found in disuse, that they had repaired. The place that the Maccabees claimed was the second temple, they found with a statue of Jupiter in it, and pork being slaughtered on the altar outside, and a gymnasium out in the outer court. They said that is the true second temple. Was it the true second temple? We don't know, because we've got 400 years of silence or 300 years of silence from Malachi until the Maccabees, right? Now, from this period, so the religion of Judaism springs up under John Hyrcanus. And this is two guys, Hillel the elder and Shammai, probably both Edomites, came in and said, hey, let's practice this thing we found here. We got these scriptures right here. These are scriptures for the chosen people. Let's be them. Let's don't be these Greeks. Let's be the chosen people. Oh, okay. But they changed it. You see, it's no longer a menorah. It's a Hanukkah. Now it's a night that you can light. That menorah you can't light. And the name Yahweh, you can't use that. That's prohibited. You have to use the name Hashem. Well, when you look at the Hasmonean Empire, why did they call it that? Because there was a demon that's identified in the book of Tobit named Asmodeus. And they were naming their kingdom after this demon, Asmodeus. Now, Asmodeus, interestingly enough, has a Hebrew name. Do you know what the Hebrew name for Asmodeus is? Hashem Dai.
Hashem Dai, yeah.
So when they're telling you to say Hashem,
right,
they're telling you to replace the name Yahweh with Ha-Hashem. Hashem Dai, the demon. So the true god, if you will, of that religion is a five-headed god of lust that killed the seven husbands of Tobit's wife.
Wow.
Before Tobit marries her, right?
It's an amazing story. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is kind of mind-boggling when you come to see this, right?
Right.
And so when you look at it, to them, Yahweh is the dirtiest word you can ever say.
Yeah.
That's the way it's taught in the synagogue. That's the dirtiest word you can ever say. And you're instructed to draw a line through the name and say instead Hashem, right? Okay, well, then you've brought the name to nothing in violation of the third commandment. You brought the name to nothing. And Moses said, publish your name. David said, declare the name. What does Mashiach feel about the ineffable name doctrine? For those people who are clinging to the ineffable name doctrine, what does Mashiach say about it? Well, right, it's right there at the end of John chapter 17 when he's praying to the Father, who, by the way, is identified in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 10, when David prays, and he begins his prayer this way: Baruch atah Yahweh Elohai Yashar'el Avinu Ma'olam Vad Olam. Blessed are you, Yahweh, the Elohai of Yashar'el, our Father forever and ever. Then he goes on to give, yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory and the majesty and the victory. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Of course it does. This is the prayer that Mashiach would teach. Pray like this. Pray like David's prayer, our Father, Avinu, Ma'olam Vadolam. You know, what does the Our Father prayer say? Avinu, Ma'olam Vadolam. Shabbat Shamayim, you, the one in heaven, the Father in heaven. What's the very next thing that comes out of his mouth? Hallowed be your name. What does he say at the end of John chapter 17? I have declared your name unto them and will declare it, that the love of you that is in me might be in them and I in them. You see that? So what does Mashiach say about the ineffable name doctrine? I'm going to declare your name. That's what he says about it. And he does declare it to Caiaphas. Are you trying to tell the truth of Mashiach? I tell you the truth. Before Abraham was, I am. Yahweh is what he said. And they went nuts. Yeah. Because of course they worship a different God. So as a consequence, if you're worshiping a five-headed god of lust, you can expect a lot of sexual stuff to come out of that in the doctrine, right? And that's what begins to appear in the Talmud. So Hillel the elder Shammai, they taught the idea that the Talmud was dead. The Torah was dead and the Talmud was living. The Talmud was controlling. The Torah was gone, the Talmud's controlling. And then John Hyrcanus converts everybody into this, most of the Edomites, into this religion, point of the sword, forced circumcision. Now, there were some Levites and there were some of the house of Yahudah still present in the land, but they were very few and far between. I mean, they represented maybe 5% of the population in this kingdom of Idumea. And so this brings up the religion of Judaism. Now, this religion, when Mashiach sees this religion, he knows this is happening. These guys have now reconstructed a temple. They're claiming the name is there. They're trying to practice the doctrines that were set forth in the kingdom of Yahudah under David. And so Mashiach comes to them to square them away. Okay, guys, look, you got this wrong, right? Your Talmud is wrong here. Your Talmud is wrong there. You're really a den of vipers. You've heaped up a bunch of burdens on men's shoulders that don't belong there. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. Why aren't you following that? And then to prove that I have authority, he spoke with authority. What's it say? Very first off, when he spoke in the synagogue, he spoke with authority, and they were all mind-boggling. It's like, you don't speak like the scribes. You speak like with authority, because he had the authority. And then he shows the authority through the miracles and through the healings and through the raising of the dead. All of these things, he's proving his authority. And he's trying to clarify to them, if you're going to pull these scriptures out, you need to find the truth of it. It's this way and not that way. It's lawful to do good on the Shabbat. It's lawful to heal on the Shabbat. It's lawful to eat the showbread on Shabbat. Because the Shabbat was created for man, not man for the Shabbat. But nonetheless, his practice was the Shabbat. Nonetheless, his practice was the feast. I mean, there'd be no Last Supper if he wasn't practicing the Pesach. Right? There would be no foundation of the whole of the community of the faith if there hadn't been the Ruach coming to them on Shavuot. Right. These feasts are for us. Yeah. They're not for the religion of Judaism. They're for us.
That's right.
And so at any rate, so this is what you see. So now when you talk about the three elements of who is Yahudah, you could be it racially, you could be it citizenship wise, but you can't because the kingdom was destroyed in 586 BC and never recreated. So you're either that genetically or you're what they call in the modern Jews, a practitioner of the religion. So the practitioner of the religion is really the defining point. Now, was there a racial centered group that was practicing this religion? Yeah, there was. And these, believe it or not, these people sprung out of they have now been identified through DNA as Greco-Roman, not Turkish, but Greco-Roman. Well, when you come to, and you can see this in the Jewish Encyclopedia says that the Ashkenazi are children of Esau.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So when you look at what happened, and Jasher gives us this story. Nobody Jasher sucks. Nobody should ever read Jasher. We hate Jasher. It's not a bona fide document. It's blah, 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 blah. But Jasher is the only one that gives us the story and says, Zepho. Who's Zepho? He was the grandson of Esau, taken captive and taken back into not the Mitzrayim, but the Cushite Empire. He's taken into the Cushite. Well, he's taken into Mitzrayim as a prisoner. He escapes and gets into the Cushite Empire, and he spends all his time in the Cushite Empire trying to talk them into making war on the guys who took him captive. Let's go up there and bust their heads, right? And they're like, we want to do that, but their army's a lot bigger than ours. We're not going. So what does he do? He goes to Italy. He goes to Italy, and he makes all these promises and becomes the king of the Kittim. He becomes the king of the Kittim at the same time that Zerach and Peretz are forming Rome. Zepho is becoming the king of the Kittim. Now, as he becomes the king, and by the way, you might say, it's not possible that Peretz and Zerach were these Romulus and Remus. Then you explain to me the Etruscan alphabet, which is Paleo-Hebrew, right? Mm-hmm. It's Paleo-Hebrew, as is the Colburn alphabet, Paleo-Hebrew. Explain to me those two alphabets. What are they doing there if Zerach and Peretz were not the founders, right? And so here you see a child of Esau, a grandson of Esau, the first king of Rome, and the kingdom of Idumea would understand that they were going to make war with the Kittim until they recognized that their king was an Edomite. We don't need to do that. And what's the next thing you see? You see this unity between the Romans and the Edomites. So when Antiochus Epiphanes comes in, and he comes out, I've had it with these guys, man, these Maccabees that are going to do this rebellion and establish this new chosen people kingdom. I've had it with this stuff. I'm going to stomp them. And he goes down to Egypt, and who is it meets him? A Roman meets him. And he draws a line in the sand. He says, if you're going to take on these Edomites, here's the line right here. If you cross that line, then we know that's what you're going to do. And the implication is then Rome's going to come at war with you. That's where drawing a line in the sand initially stems from. That story with Antiochus Epiphanes. So Antiochus flees, he leaves, and he goes back, and he ultimately dies from syphilis, and he loses the kingdom. He loses the Maccabean kingdom, the Hasmonean kingdom, right? Well, this is actually an Edomite kingdom that becomes controlled by Edomites under Herod. So when you get to the Herodian kingdom, that's an Edomite kingdom. It's Idumea all over again, okay? And so this house of Esau is now controlling Rome. It's controlling its leaders. And the Caesars, who would declare themselves Pontiff Maximus, were children of Esau. Esau. Okay, Esau. Now, this is going to become much more difficult when we get farther into this. But this group of people were the ones who eventually migrated into Central Europe and then eventually migrated into this area of Khazar, because this area of Khazar is one of the most fertile places on earth. I mean, particularly when you're talking about like the Khazarian Empire occupied all the way to the Caspian Sea. That means, what is now modern Krasnodar and Cherkessia and all of this. This is, we used to do mission work with what was called the Black Soil Project, because it is so fertile over in that area. It's unbelievable. And so they had occupied this area all the way to what we now call Odessa, and all the way back to what we now call Well, the capital city was Atil, and that is now the province of Dagestan in southern Russia. And the capital city there is now called Astrakhan, which used to be called Atil, from Attila the Hun. He came
Right.
out of there, Atil. Yeah. So that was, and that's now, they changed it to Astrakhan when Genghis Khan captured the whole area. Okay. So the Russians would pull that area away from the Mongols. They defeated the Mongols, right? That's the first step. But that became when Russia became, imperious to defeat on the battlefield when they defeated the Mongols, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so you have this idea that they were in this fertile area. Well, the problem was these guys were notorious because they were identity thieves, they were pirates, and by deception, they waged war. So they would take on the names of somebody and take on their identity and then claim to be royalty or nobility or whatever. They were engaged in identity theft right from the get-go. Well, the Kievan Rus would get ticked off at them. The Kievan Rus finally said, look, you guys, we're not going to do this anymore. We're an Orthodox people, and you need to settle down on what you're going to do. So they declared Judaism to be their religion.
Right.
Now, when they did, when this was around the 8th century, they declared Judaism to be religion. Why? Because it was that same idea of the Maccabean approach, right? Edomites that had gone into this religion of Judaism. It went around 165, 150 BC. That would be transferred into Rome. That's why the popes wear kippahs, right? And then that would ultimately be transferred into Khazaria. And in the Khazaria, they would bring in this Babylonian Talmud. And so the Talmud is going to continue to be increased with even more wickedness. It's going to be increased with even more wickedness. The writing of Maimonides includes its own share of wickedness. And then of course, you would see guys like Sabati Tzvi and the Kabbalists that would begin to arise in the 1400s after the expulsion from Spain. In particular, they began to rise in Safed and in Istanbul or Constantinople. And all of this language would get transferred into the Talmud. And so then when you get to the 1200s, Shem Tov, they began to develop rabbinical Judaism. Okay. Now, under rabbinical Judaism, it is not a question of believing in Yah. It is not a question of believing in the Torah. It is obeying the rabbi. You might remember Fiddler on the Roof when Rev Tevye says, well, it's written in the good book. Well, what does the rabbi have to say about it? Well, the good book says, and he didn't know what the good book said, right? No. There must be something in the good book about the chicken, right? Right? He didn't know what was said in the good book, and he relied on the rabbi to tell him what was in the good book. And the rabbi would spend all his time penciling the Talmud, right? So the rabbis were teaching them, you can divorce your wife if she burns the toast. This is the kind of stuff that they're finding in the Talmud, right? And there's even a reference to that in Fiddler on the Roof. And what does Rev Tevye say? We do these things because they're tradition, right? And so it's all about the tradition, and it's about the rabbinical authority governing the tradition. It is not about the worship of Yah. It has nothing to do with that.
Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, right?
Bingo. I mean, that's it. So you can see, for instance, many modern Jews, self-professed atheists, and their children being taught atheism, will nonetheless go to Jerusalem for a bar mitzvah in front of the kotel. Because it's the tradition.
It is.
Yeah. So traditional rabbinicalism would then become the dominant theme of Judaism. So rabbinicalism and Judaism, Talmudism, they're pretty much hand in hand. Until you began to see some very radical rabbis start to rise in the 19th century, like Victor Mordecai, who would change his name to Karl Marx, for instance. Radical rabbi. There were other radical rabbis, a guy named Rus, who would be the founder of Zionism, that would be picked up by Theodor Herzl. And then you would see guys coming out of rabbinical leadership that would enter into radical political groups called the Bolsheviks. Right. And so Bolshevism was strictly a Talmudic enterprise run by radical atheist Talmudists. So you have to understand there's a great film that's available. You can't get it on YouTube, but I think it's available on BitChute maybe or Rumble. But it's called Europa, and it's all in capital letters, Europa. And it gives the history of the Bolshevik Revolution and how brutal was that genocide in Russia. And if you really want to understand the Russian people, until you understand the difficulty of that Bolshevik genocide in Russia, you don't understand them at all. You do not understand Russians. And for the Russians to come back to being an Orthodox nation like they are today is absolutely remarkable. This is in the hands of Yah and in the hands of Yah only. It's absolutely remarkable that this would take place. So again, so what we do see is this, is that those who call themselves Jews today have no linkage whatsoever to the house of Yahudah. Rather, they're Greco-Roman in their racial origin, not Turkish, Greco-Roman. They're Greco-Roman, and they became Jews as a consequence of the practice of the religion beginning in the 8th century. And and the difficulty with the Talmud is that if you believe the Talmud becomes a curse. And it's like once you have a Mason in your family, it's very difficult to break, particularly a 33rd level Mason, very difficult to break free from that curse, because the Mason eats the soul of the next 4 generations in front of him. All the blessings that would come to his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, he takes unto himself as a Mason.
Yeah.
And Talmudism has its own curse as well. And so the curse of Talmudism is once you have somebody begin to believe it and to practice it, it brings a curse upon your family that remains for generations. It's a more difficult curse than the Masonic order. It's a more difficult curse. Okay. So because of this now, the Talmud would be practiced by the Sephardim in Spain as well. And they suffered as a result, but they didn't suffer as badly as the Ashkenazim did. But the Sephardim would be expelled from Spain, because what the scriptures say, if you do these things, I will vomit you out of the land that I have given you. And they were vomited out of the land. And that's what happened. And they've been repeatedly vomited out of the land where they have gone. They don't see any correlation between their practice and the fact that they get repeatedly vomited out of the land. They're being vomited out of the land right now in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And this is something that is certain to happen. Now, for those people that do not understand it, so again, when we talk about Yahudah, now I'm leaving out a portion of this too, and I don't want to leave out this portion of it, because there are many of the tribes of Yashar'el that are also present in Africa.
Right.
There is a black tribe of Yahudah in Kenya. There is a black tribe of Levi in Kenya. There is a black tribe of Levi in Zimbabwe and down into South Africa. The House of Dan is present in Nigeria and in that area. There's Yahudim in Ghana and in those areas. And so we cannot leave out the black Africans. Now, also, all of the House of Israel, all 12 tribes were present in Libya.
Right.
What was called the Carthaginian Empire. That was actually the northern tribes of Israel had populated that area before the Assyrian captivity of 722 BC. So you can, and probably Moroccans were also probably of the house. Same thing. So you cannot kick back and say, "Oh, gee, we know who the house of Yahudah is." You really don't.
We don't.
And we believe, for instance, that the house of Dan is present in Japan. The house of Naphtali is present in China and in Southeast Asia and in the Polynesians. The house of Manasseh is present in American Indians. I mean, it goes, and the tribes of Yahudah is also present in the American Indian tribes in the St. Lawrence Waterway. The Iroquois speak a form of Hebrew. Okay. Right. So, I mean, this is some,
It's amazing. I work with Dr. Monzo a lot, who wrote the Aleph Tav Body System, which we've got to get you that book, Dr. Pidgeon. You've got to get a copy of this. It's really interesting, because what he did is this came to him from studying jujitsu and seeing in ancient Japan where there was a healing system where the Paleo Hebrew alphabet was mapped to different points on the physical body that is a deep energy system that when you lay on hands, you can move energy in the body to help heal the body.
Yeah, what's that system where they poke you with the needles?
That's acupuncture, but it doesn't, right. But that's kind of a more surface system. This is just the laying on of hands that is a very deep system, because it even affects the soul and the emotions that have been trapped into the body. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really interesting. Yeah.
it is interesting, and yeah, and well, I won't say anything more about that, but I will see if I can find that book. But yeah, Shell.
We'll
So,
make sure you get one of those books, Dr. Pigeon.
okay. Sounds good. Sounds good. So anyway,
You,
Shell. So go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying that when you look at these tribes now. So if you understand that of the current kingdom of Israel, the current nation of Israel, is again its identity theft.
Mm-hmm.
That, as some people have said, they have no tie, no genetic tie whatsoever to the Middle Eastern people. They've got no genetic tie to them at all, and this has been proven. I mean, peer-reviewed papers have
You
proven
mean
this.
he is not going to establish it?
Yeah. And so because of this, the real land that they're in is the kingdom of Idumea. They have recaptured Idumea, not Iudea.
Wow.
Okay, they've recaptured Idumea, not Iudea. Now, because of this, even though they mislabeled it as Israel, and it really wasn't them who mislabeled it, it was their agents at the UN that mislabeled it in the UN resolution S-181 that called it Israel. Well, it was never called Israel, not even under David and Solomon was it called Israel. David ruled the kingdom of Yahudah, and it became the unified kingdom of Yahudah under David and Solomon. Only when it broke apart, the northern kingdom became known as Yitzrael, not Israel, but Yitzrael, and the southern kingdom was called Iudea. So what are you talking about? Israel, right? This is all hodgepodge, people who didn't read their scriptures, who have got pop culture going on, everything they know, they came from their Sunday school teacher who wasn't educated at all. And, so this is what they do. So anyway, okay. All right. So we have a Muslim here asking a question in the chat.
Yeah. And we had one earlier. So I know that Adam was saying, let me just start it from the beginning.
Who is God, or what is the meaning of Allah? God says in the Quran, Allah is but one God. Okay, so let's talk about this, and let's talk about this for our brother Adem Ahmed. Okay, so first of all, we see that the word Allah does appear in the Ivrit. Okay, and so most Arabic is a downstream language from the original Hebrew. You can see many, many words in the Arabic that are very, very similar to the words you see in the Hebrew. Not modern Hebrew, I'm talking about biblical Hebrew. And they're also, and Aramaic the same way. Aramaic is downstream from the Hebrew. They're the same way, they're downstream languages. And so what you see in the Ivrit is you see names that are not names, but rather they're titles. So for instance, El, Elohim, Elohai, right? One of the names that appears in the book of Daniel, and it also appears in the book of Job, is Eloah. Now, this is the same word that has been adopted in Islam as Allah. So Allah is not the name of the creator. It is the title that has been given because, again, there is a certain amount of respect inside even the Quran for the ineffable name doctrine. Even though the ineffable name doctrine is anti-scriptural. It's anti-scriptural. So what you see inside of Islam is you see this. You see that there is the idea, when you see it in the Shema, which also appears not only in Deuteronomy or Devarim, but also appears in the Gospel of Mark. Shema Yashar'el, Yahweh Eloheinu Yahweh Echad, Yahweh Echad. So this word Echad can mean one, but it also means alone, right? So when you understand this, Yahweh, our Elohim, Yahweh, alone, singular. There is no one besides Yahweh, okay? There's nothing behind Yahweh. There's no creator behind Yahweh. There is Yah, and that is it. And then all the creation stems from that. All of creation is part of that. All of creation is engaged in that. There is nothing outside of Yahweh. Nothing. There is nothing outside. He populates an infinite number of dimensions infinitely. Okay, So there is nothing behind that. Okay. It's the absolute beginning and the end of everything. So we say, okay, so you say, well, Allah is one. But the doctrine that says Allah has no son is a doctrine that does not capture what is going on. Now, we've had this huge debate inside the Cepher community, where we have been plastered against the wall. In fact, it was the very first criticism that came against us because of Philippians 2:11, that Yahusha is Yahweh to the glory of Yah the Father. Now, the difficulty with this in the understanding in the Islamic world where this is misconceived is because when you take the idea of the word son, you're thinking to yourself, oh, well, this was a son that came through the birth canal. And the difficulty in the Gospels is that you have the Ben Adam and the Ben Elohim. And so when you talk about the Ben Adam, the son of man, and the son of Elohim in the same persona, well, that's an impossibility. But we see that in John chapter 1, it says, and the word was made flesh and tabernacled among us. So what we have to understand, and this is what I would say to the brothers and sisters in the Islamic world, is that when you see Yah, people think, well, look, we reject the idea that there's God in three persons. I agree with that. There's no God in three persons. That doesn't mean that there's not a Trinitarian aspect to Yah, but there's no three persons. There's one person. Because what does Mashiach say? If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. What does the prophecy of Yeshayahu say? Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Almighty El, the Everlasting Father. His name shall be called the Everlasting Father. That's the prophecy that's in Isaiah, right? The Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace. Okay, so when we talk about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim, and then the Word was made flesh and tabernacled among us, that for the believer who is accepting of the premise that Yahweh Echad, Yahweh alone, Yahweh one, Yahweh singular, that of course you cannot see the burning fire that is Yahweh. This is what Peter says. He is a consuming fire. You cannot see him. Yet, Moses saw somebody, Isaiah saw somebody, John saw somebody, Daniel saw somebody. Who did they see? They saw what Yah had made present to us, which is Yah made himself manifest in the flesh that we might have a mediator, that we might see him. So there is no difference. Well, there is. There is a slight delineation between the manifestation of Yahweh on the earth as Yahusha and the Father in heaven, because the Father in heaven reserves unto himself when heaven and earth will pass away. Everything else is in the manifestation of Yahweh on the earth. So the doctrine of consubstantiality, he was with him in the beginning. He was with him in the beginning. So the difficulty with Islam is that Islam gets misled by the idea that they're expecting this son, because the term son is used. But the term son, there's, like, for instance, if you say bin Abraham in the Arabic, and bin Abraham, the son of Abraham, right? In the Hebrew, ben Avraham, but in the Arabic, bin Avraham. Okay, so when we look at this idea, this gives you the idea that it's the son of Abraham. But when we talk about Mashiach, it's something different than that. It's something more than that. And this was a huge debate inside the faith for 500 years, by the way, because the Arians said he was conceived. Therefore, he was born. There was no Mashiach before his conception. And yet the New Testament tells us replete that he was with the Father before the foundation of the earth, before time began. Well, what does that mean? He was with the Father before the time began. That there was a persona of Yah in existence before the time began. We call it a son. We call it a son, but that's in order for us to have a human framework to understand it. But the truth is, Yahusha was always a manifestation of Yahweh, the singular Echad Yahweh, from the very beginning. Now, let me just share this with the Muslim brothers too, Muslim brothers and sisters. Because one of the doctrines, there are two doctrines that come with Yahushua. There's a couple of new things that come too. One is, of course, baptism. The other is the casting out of demons. And you know, when you read the Quran, that the discussion of jinns is replete throughout the Quran. There's not a discussion of demons in the Old Testament. In the Tanakh, there's no discussion of demons unless you read the book of Hanok, in which case you'll understand demons and devils. But there's a huge discussion of demons in the Quran, talking about the jinn. Go to the 144th surah of the Quran and read what Muhammad has to say about the jinns. So you know that this idea of demons and casting out demons, this was declared a new doctrine in the New Testament. Very first thing Mashiach did was cast out demons during the Shabbat. And this was declared a new doctrine. And what is this? We've never seen this before. And baptism, too, a new doctrine. But there were two things that were brought to the earth in Mashiach that were so critical, and this is critical to the Islamic world as well, these are the doctrines of love and forgiveness. The doctrines of love and forgiveness. Now, let me explain about how critical these are. If you look at the Torah of Moshe has the death penalty for many things. Oh, you missed the Sabbath, dead. Oh, you cut firewood, dead. Oh, you talked back to your parents, dead. Oh, you did this, dead. Take him out and stone him, right? In the King James, put him to death, right? Even though in the Hebrew it says, mut vamut, shall die the death. But in English, that's translated to put him to death. Okay. Arguably, every single person is deserving of death. If Moshe is our judge in heaven, we're all dead. Because at some point you did one of those things, in which case you're subject to the death penalty. So because of this, mankind is separated from the Creator, from Yahweh. Mankind is separated. Mankind was destined to the same fate as the Nephilim, the Naphthalim, cast into a lake of fire of no forgiveness forever and ever. No chance of redemption, no chance to be retained in heaven. It is Mashiach who reconciles not the house of Yashar'el, although he came first to the house of Yashar'el, but he reconciled the whole world. He reconciled the whole world because he was the Lamb of Elohim. Now, this is a difficult concept, particularly in the Islamic world, to understand that there would be a lamb that could reconcile the whole of the world. But Leviticus 17:11 says, for the blood of the life of the flesh is in the blood, is in the blood. He and I have given it to you upon the altar. For his blood in your soul is redemption. So when we look at this idea that the blood of Mashiach would be this redemption, the doctrines of love and forgiveness come in. And under the doctrines of forgiveness and understanding that Yah has made himself into flesh that we might see him and know him and hear from him and smell it, eat with him. That this might happen, that we would have that kind of communication, open the door to the throne room itself. And because his blood was shed on the cross, there is no animal sacrifice that is required evermore. And the doctrine of forgiveness becomes present with the confession of your mouth and the belief in your heart. And suddenly, even though the Quran says that every man and every woman will be judged on their knees in hell for the works they have done, and even though your works are called to be part of your redemption schedule in the book of Revelation 3 times, nonetheless, the work of Mashiach on the cross brings forgiveness, atonement, propitiation. And suddenly, those sins of your life that are transmuted, those sins of your life that are transfigured, those sins of your life that are completely amalgamated to your soul are washed away. And the white linen of Mashiach covers you. And you are seen as one of the cells in the body of Mashiach, in his body himself. The one who comes to judge you, you are part of his body itself at the day of judgment. And you are no longer judged on your knees in hell, but rather you are forgiven and you are loved by the Father himself. And this is the true doctrine of Mashiach, rather than the doctrine that's been told by the church and the doctrine that was explained to Muhammad during his lifetime. See, it was a tainted doctrine that was explained to Muhammad. Not that Muhammad was wrong in his ideology. I'm just telling you that the ideology that he understood about Christianity was a tainted doctrine given to him by Romans. Okay. So with that, what I would say to you inside of Islam is that, Islam, like Judaism, claims a tie back to Abraham, right? All claim being children of Abraham. It's an Abrahamic religion. And let me just say this. The Quran gets a lot of grief because Muhammad married a 9-year-old and so on and so forth. There were a lot of things said horrible about the Quran during the Bush administration and so on. The Quran is not as wicked as the Talmud, not even close. It's not even half as wicked. It's not close. It's not even similar. The Talmud is by far the most wicked document on earth today. So if you're coming out of the practice of Islam, and one of the things I love about the Islamic people is that you guys like to reason. You like to talk. You have imams that like to talk about what's in the Quran. You have imams that like to express ideas. But let me just say this. Every person has 2 ears and 1 mouth, which means listen twice as much as you talk, right? And so I say to you that, as a brother to you, that we can live in this world together. Even if you and I have disparaging views upon one another, we can live in this world together. We don't have to call each other terrorists or bomb each other or blow each other up. We can live in this world together. That's easy to do, really quite easy to do, even though we are of different perspective. But I also say to you that my understanding of the Quran and the Hadith and the Sunnah and so forth is one that what I'm sharing with you today. And what I'm sharing with you today is not to nitpick the Quran, to say this, that, and the other thing, which is possible to do, as it is to do with the Tanakh, very easy. But rather, to say to you that the clarity inside the Quran would be to understand that Allah is a title and not a name. When you understand that aspect of it, it is a title and not a name. Now you begin your inquiry. Well, if it's not the name, then what is the name? Well, the name is given to us. And if you recall, the cow, the opening surah in the Quran, it proclaims Moshe was a prophet. It proclaims Abraham was a prophet, right? It proclaims these things in the opening of the Quran. What did Abraham have to say? What did Moshe have to say? I proclaimed his name. And what was his name written in all of their writings? Yahudah. Yahudah. Okay, that's my answer to your question.
That was an excellent answer, Dr. Pidgeon. That was just fantastic. We had one more question that if you have time for it, I'll go ahead and bring that up. Nance, she says, if it's live, does anyone know if the pilot letters to Caesar Augustus are authentic?
And the answer is yes, they are. And so you're talking about, Nance, you're talking about the Archko volume, and there is a similar testimony in what's called the Gospel of Nicodemus, which is also referred to as the Acts of Pontius Pilate. Now, we've been doing our own research on this, and I mean, I'm telling you, it's mind-boggling who the wife of Pontius Pilate was, right? The wife of Pontius Pilate, actually a daughter of Caesar Augustus. Their child, who was born in 20 BC, was Philo, of the book Philo. And she was a believer. She had been converted, and she knew Mashiach's faith, and that's why she told Pilate, don't have anything to do with him. Pilate eventually became converted after the crucifixion. Pilate himself became converted. And the Archko volume, that letter of Pilate to Caesar, is phenomenal. Because what does he say? I mean, it's such fantastic in that letter. He says, look, at the time of the crucifixion, first of all, let me give you an idea of the indicia of authenticity. He's arguing in front of the Sanhedrin, and he's telling the Sanhedrin, look, under our law, he needs to be put to death. And Caesar says to him, that's not true. Under your law, you cannot put him to death in the same day you've convicted him. You can't put him to death today because under your law, you can't do that. In fact, you have to give it a week. So you can't do it. So he's arguing with them about the law of the Sanhedrin. Oh, no. You have to do it. You have to do it. You have to do it. Right. And then when he describes the crucifixion, he says, look, at the time of the crucifixion, all of these guys that were screaming for his crucifixion there at Pilate's place had gone up to the cross, and they're all howling and moaning and screaming and going on with some kind of a demonic, some kind of demonic festival that's happening at the cross. And when he suddenly died, it suddenly got very, very quiet, and all the demons had left the people, and they looked and went, oh, it looks like he was just proclaimed King of the Jews as a matter of Roman law. And wasn't this the guy that healed our kids and brought people out of the grave and ended leprosy? And what did we do? And there was chagrin that came over the people. But he describes them as being demon kept at the time of the crucifixion. So, so this is something quite interesting. So yes, the article volume, I do think, sets forth an accurate recitation of Pilate's letter. And we also know that there is people in Switzerland know of the mountain where Pilate committed suicide. It's on Lake Lucerne. And the book of Acts, chapter 29, which is included in the Cepher, Paul visits that spot where Pilate had committed suicide in Lucerne, Switzerland. And so all of these things are recorded. There's actually quite a replete record of all of this stuff. And the record of Pilate in particular is a great record because he was called into denunciation for what had happened in Idumea, because of course it's caused an uprising, and that uprising ultimately ended in the Bar Kokhba revolt, the slaughter at Masada, and eventually all of those people being expelled from the land for 2,000 years. Yeah. Guess what happened, Shell?
What happened?
They got vomited out of the land.
Yes. Absolutely. This has been such a great discussion. I wanted to share with you one thing of something that I'm working on with understanding the tribes and the function as far as like what you were talking about, being a cell in the body of Mashiach. One of the things, I've done a big presentation on this as far as the tribe of Levi being a fully represented in everything that we can find from the scriptures of Levi, fully represented in the cardiovascular system of a human being. It's amazing. And I just wanted to share with you that it is the respiratory system, the breath, going through that is lining up with the tribe of Yahudah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I got to tell you, Shell, I mean, there's a whole ton of studies that were done in the Eastern world concerning breathing. For instance, Taoism, which is kind of Taoism is not really a religion. It's more of kind of a logic system, or a system of wisdom, you might say, developed by Lao Tzu. And in Taoism, they talk about this idea of breathing, and actually in controlling and learning your breath, and how breath can bring healing. Now, I can tell you, I studied as a singer, and so we studied breathing a lot, right? Because you have to learn how to breathe out of all your lungs, not the top half of your lungs like most people do, but you have to breathe out of all your lungs. And of course, we know that man was created how? And Yah blew his breath into the nostrils of Adam, his nefesh, not nefesh, his hayat neshama, hayim neshama.
Right.
And which was, he blew his name into the nostrils of Adam, and Adam became a living soul, right? And so when you see and we have the breath of Yah in us, the same breath that was blown into the nostrils of Adam is the breath blown into our nostrils. If somebody knocks you out, you're still breathing, because it's not your breath. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to Yah. That breath that you breathe, that belongs to Yah. That's his. That's his. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, Shell. And I want to thank you for being the heart of the tribe.
Thank you.
I think your ministry is outstanding, and thank you for being such a willful servant to continue to push forward. And we push forward. You know how it is in the world, man. Everybody's got a bow and arrow, And and it's like, hey, I believe there's 236 angels on the head of a pin. You said 239. I'm going to pound you.
That's right. That's right. Well, yeah. Wise words from my friend. Learn when to wipe the dust off your feet. Isn't that what you've told me?
Well, yeah, I mean, and that is a lesson I have to remind myself too. There's times when you have to wipe the dust off your feet, and so that's what we do. But anyway, blessings
Yeah.
to you, Shell. Thank for inviting me into this program. I appreciate it, sister.
Oh, well, I
And
certainly appreciate it. I appreciate you coming.
okay, all right. So we will see you again soon.
Yes, very soon. I look forward to it. I look forward to it.
Baruch
Okay.
atah Yahweh Elohai Yashar'el Avinu Ma'olam Vadolam. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Shalom, everyone.